word. Yes, I talk to myself all the time. Okay. We have, I'll show you the prayer things, but we had a couple of additional prayer requests. Cindy Duck asked us to pray for one of her friends. His name is Richard, and she got to know Richard. Obviously, Cindy went through a stem cell transplant, and so she gets to know a lot of other people who goes through stem cell transplants. And Richard went through one very successfully, but now he's in the hospital in very serious condition fighting COVID. So he's been through so much, and now he's in the hospital. So keep him in your prayers. I know we sent out an email that Glenn that we prayed for last week. Cheryl's next door neighbor did pass away this week from COVID. If for those of you who don't read your email, and pray for his wife Lisa and their 2 children and all the people who are coming in today. Cheryl lives on about 3 acres. Her next door neighbor has 1.5 acres, and Cheryl mows her own 3 acres herself. And she has started finished his front yard and doing Glenn's and Lisa's backyard before all the people come in today. So pray for Cheryl too, because it is hot out there, and she is a great neighbor. And then
can you read them?
Yes, I can read them. Just a second. Alton and Kathy's on today. Kathy, we're glad you're on. We're sorry you're not here in person, but we're really happy you're on. And continue to pray for Phil and Cherie.
You gotta look up. Jean can't hear you.
Okay. Finished praying for and pray for Kelly, who is in Canada. Lori Fisher, who is a silversmith artist here, and she has stage 4 breast cancer, and also it's gone to her bones. And she went to MD Anderson on Friday, but we haven't heard if they've accepted her and how that is. And please pray for my husband. His back is really bad. So Scott, yes, and Bob just okay.
One of my work colleagues, he has a son, 18 years old, who was born with Down syndrome, but he had all the possible complications. And so he was told that he wasn't going to live, and he's married 18 years, and I keep running the blessing.
What's her name and what's the son's name?
The
Her
son's
first
name is Warwick.
Warwick
Arsuaga. Her name is Bridget. But he's scheduled to have a heart cath. And for someone like him, that's like very, very, I don't know, doubtful. He needs the procedure, but he may not make it through the procedure.
Oh, well.
And also another prayer, Bob just prayed that we could add Ben to our prayer list today. And, you know, Ben Sims is Bob's son, and he is a Green Bay Packer, and Packer camp opens today. So pray for him, and also pray for, when you watch those football games, the biggest thing I think is pray for no injuries.
Yeah.
Kay, who has internet, please pray for my great nephew, Christopher. He's fighting, it looks like drug addiction.
Yeah.
What is it? Yeah.
Drug addiction.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we know how that is.
We do. And you learn, we used to tell people stuff like that went on with Peter. And just, I always said, we don't mind opening up a vein and bleeding for you. And afterwards, it was amazing how many people came to us and said, we've got a son that's in the same shape. We've got a grandson or a granddaughter in the same shape. We have a place, and I'm in a lot of pain. I've been in pain for the last couple of weeks, but today it's kind of a lot. And it's, I think about Lisa, Kelly up in Canada. She was in that wreck. She knows the cause, but they can't stop the pain. And so if I'm sweating, that's why. So it's a little, you know, it's a little difficult to focus, but you see how many people we know personally, you know, between us that are in a different kind of pain. Remember, these prayers are important. And I wanted young man with Down syndrome, your
Where?
friend, Warwick,
Warwick,
and his mother,
Bridget.
Bridget. Anytime it involves our kids, it's even worse. So Warwick and Bridget, try and remember, we, talk to God through the week. Remember these people. God, we're always thankful. We try to be. Sometimes it's difficult. We see your hand in the world that we lived in. We feel your presence and we see your plan through the other people, through the body, through the outpouring. Be with these that we've mentioned. At times we're not even wise enough to know what to ask for. We know what we want, but we don't know that that's the wise thing. You know our hearts. Give us the trust to understand when we don't understand, the trust to believe that you're sovereign in these things. Help us when we study, as we teach these things, that this is more than a history lesson, that this is an example set down for us all that time ago. Amen.
Okay, week 2 of Esther. And where we left off, remember Esther, we know when Esther occurred because King Xerxes is a historical being, and we know he reigned from 486 BC to 465 BC. So we know that when this is taking place. And that King Xerxes was the king of the Medo Persian Empire. And this is taking place in Susa, which was one of the capitals, I guess, of the Medo Persian Empire, and it is in present-day Iran. Where we left off, it was 493 BC, and King Xerxes just picked Esther as his queen, and it was the 7th year of his reign. Okay. And we left off on chapter 2, and I will start at verse 17. And the king loved Esther more than all the other women, and she found grace and favor in his sight more than all the other virgins. So he placed the royal crown upon her head and made her queen in place of Vashti. Then the king held a great banquet, Esther's banquet, for all his officials and servants. He proclaimed a tax holiday in the province and gave gifts worthy of the king's bounty. When the virgins were assembled a second time, Mordecai was sitting at the king's gate. Esther still had not revealed her lineage or her people, just as Mordecai had instructed. She obeyed Mordecai's command as she had done under his care. I'm going to stop there.
Okay. So, you see the thing that he was very impressed with Esther. He winds up making her his queen. And this banquet, Esther's banquet, this giant party. I keep telling you these things, and I know in the first chapter, sometimes you think I'm making it up, but you're going to keep seeing who Xerxes is as we progress. But he throws a great big banquet, and he gives lavish gifts to people just because he can, because he's Xerxes. And I think the biggest thing is it talks about Mordecai sitting at the king's gate. And I think it's pretty well believed, understood to mean that Mordecai is a palace servant. I may have mentioned that last week, but he's sort of, one of the gatekeepers when people come to visit Xerxes. And so he's privy to a whole lot of information. The last piece is he had instructed Esther not to tell anybody she's a Jew. There hasn't been any specific trouble that we've heard about, but Mordecai thinks it's wise for her not to tell. It turns out to be a really good decision, but you notice she obeys Mordecai. She's his daughter. He adopted her, and she does what a good Jewish daughter does. She obeys. So she's told no one at this point that she's a Jew, which obviously becomes important.
That verse 19 that says, when the virgins were assembled a second time, Mordecai was sitting at the king's gate. It seems sort of like it's out of order. I mean, what does that mean? Because we just talked about her now, she is now the queen. It seems, and we read a lot about it, nobody does completely understands what that means. But that whole last paragraph there is emphasizing, as Scott says, the fact that the big thing is that Mordecai is a palace guard of some sort, one, and two, Mordecai told Esther not to tell of her lineage of being a Jew, and she followed that. And it has mentioned that before, but it's like they wanted to re-emphasize it here before we go on to the next section. So we're on verse 21. In those days, while Mordecai was sitting at the king's gate, Bigthan and Teresh, two of the king's eunuchs who guarded the entrance, grew angry and conspired to assassinate King Xerxes. When Mordecai learned of the plot, he reported it to Queen Esther, and she informed the king on Mordecai's behalf. After the report had been investigated and verified, both officials were hanged on the gallows, and all this was recorded in the book of the Chronicles in the presence of the king.
So said last week that these eunuchs, they use them as the king's using the servants because they think no testosterone, you're probably not going to be as ambitious. But two of them, here are two of the palace eunuchs, go outside for a smoke. And while they're out there, they're discussing how angry they are with Xerxes, and they're gonna kill him. They have access to Xerxes. Few people do. And because of who they are, it's something that they could pull off. And Mordecai overhears it. I mentioned from time to time, we tend to treat some people like furniture. You go to a motel or a hotel, the people who clean the rooms, the people who are standing there just ignore them. They move past them. Most of the time, they don't acknowledge them.
Talk in front of them.
They talk in front of them. They say things in front of them because they're just part of the furniture. These two guys are out there discussing this. If they had been thinking, they probably shouldn't have been doing it out loud. But, you know, nobody's paying attention. Mordecai is. He reports through Esther because she has access. The plot's foiled, and these two guys are put on a gallows. In that area at that time, they did it. They impaled people a lot on these big things. And I don't know that it's the same gallows that we think of. That was sort of their habit, but they still call it a gallows. Anyway, the two eunuchs, it's a public execution, which is what you kind of need to know. And it's recorded in their own book of Chronicles. They have an official history. And if it gets recorded in there, it's a big deal. So this plot on the king gets publicly recorded. And that's sort of as a warning shot to everybody else.
Scott, do we know they got angry?
Mr. Michael?
Do you know if they got angry on a religious basis or just the fact that Queen Esther got appointed?
We don't really know. We don't really know. It's that we're not told anything about that. And I've gone to see if there's any historical thing. And we don't know that it's related to Esther at all. They're mad about something. You know, you palace intrigue, go to any big office building in the country and there's people in there mad at each other. You know, this
Sound like it's
happens.
policies.
Yeah, they don't like it's his policies. It's not the
Sound
man.
familiar?
Yeah.
We're on chapter 3. On chapter 3, and look at, Scott always points out that there are these phrases at the beginning of things that are important. So this one starts with after these events. So there's some passage of time. We don't know how much passage of time, but there's passage of time. In this next sections, there's several of those.
If you're not careful, these stories get so compressed in our minds that you think this all takes place in a matter of weeks. It doesn't.
It's years.
It's years. Yes, sir.
Well, and
You're right.
Xerxes is the same Xerxes that invaded all the way into Greece.
Yes, he is.
And so he was on campaigns constantly because he was trying to conquer the world. And he thought of himself, thought of as a god.
As a god, yeah.
Yeah.
And that's what they made the movie 300 about. It's worth noting that Xerxes, for real, and that's what 300 was. When I say that Xerxes is kind of weak-willed, that he has these advisors and they can kind of manipulate him. The real Xerxes was manipulated, and not that this isn't real, but I'm
Right.
saying historically, Xerxes sort of got maneuvered into a war with Greece that he didn't want, and he lost. And it was and it kind of ushers in the rise of Alexander the Great. So yeah, I mean, this stuff is very historical, and it's very much in character when we see, we say Xerxes is sort of weak-willed and he likes to throw big parties.
Chapter 3. After these events, King Xerxes honored Haman, son of Hammedatha, the Agagite, elevating him to a position above all princes who were with him. All the royal servants at the king's gate bowed down and paid homage to Haman, because the king had commanded that this be done. But Mordecai would not bow down to pay him homage.
So here's what we told you about before the first week started. Xerxes makes this guy Haman, makes him his number one. He's the top dog. He's his chief advisor. Remember back in chapter 1, it talks about 7 princes who were his chief advisors, and Haman wasn't one of them. So now Mordecai's got a new favorite, right? This is the guy he is. He is just impetuous. And he decides, this is my favorite advisor. He tells me all the stuff I want to hear, and he makes him his number one advisor, number one guy. And then he tells everybody that they have to bow down and kowtow to this guy. Kowtow, that's totally different, isn't it? Kowtow to this guy. Anytime he walks past, you bow down to him, right? That's an instruction from the king. And everybody does it because it's an instruction from the king. Mordecai won't. Did we get to that part where it says Mordecai?
Yeah.
Mordecai, being a good Jew, is not going to bow down to this pagan king. And it begins to cause no end of problems. But before week 1, what I told you was this guy Haman is referred to as an Agagite or Agagite. And what it goes way back, but it was a Canaanite king, Amalekite king, and it's become synonymous with anti-Semite, Jew hater. By the time this comes around, if you say somebody's an Agagite, he's a Jew hater. It's telling us that the Amalekites were mortal enemies with the Jews, and this hatred goes back to Amalek himself, who they think is mistreated. And so anyway, Agag is one of the kings that got taken captive and then killed. So you see the stage here. Haman is now Xerxes' number one guy, and he hates Jews.
And anybody who was hearing this story would know that, right? Then the royal servants at the king's gate asked Mordecai, "Why do you disobey the command of the king?" Day after day, they warned him, but he would not comply. So they reported it to Haman to see whether Mordecai's behavior would be tolerated, since he had told them he was a Jew. When Haman saw that Mordecai would not bow down to pay him homage, he was filled with rage. And when he learned the identity of Mordecai's people, he scorned the notion of laying hands on Mordecai alone. Instead, he sought to destroy all of Mordecai's people, the Jews, throughout the kingdom of Xerxes.
So here you see, Mordecai won't bow down, and the other people there at the gate, their other servants, employees, they go, "Hey, why are you disobeying the king's will? Why are you refusing to do what we do?" When Gene, you asked that question about, this is human beings. This is office politics. We're bowing down? Why aren't you bowing down? And this goes on for, day after day. At some point, we see that Mordecai apparently told them, I'm a Jew. We worship Yahweh. We do not bow down to these earthly kings. The people first say, if we have to bow down, you should have to bow down. And it makes them angry. So they go and rat him out. It says they went and told to see whether this would be tolerated. And Haman finds out, and he's saying, "Who is this guy? What do you mean he won't? He won't bow down to me. I'm the number one." And he's angry at Mordecai, and I'm just speculating. But before you go punish the guy, you want to know if he's really influential. So you do some homework on him, and that's when he finds out this is a Jew. He hates Jews. He hates Jews. We see it today.
In that sentence, he scorned the notion of laying hands on Mordecai alone. So he just didn't want to do, when he found out he was a Jew, he's like, it's not, he's just one of those, and we're going to kill, I want to kill all
Oh
of them.
yeah, no, I mean, I would whoever this guy is that won't kowtow to me, I'd have him picked up and flogged or whatever. But he's a Jew? Oh no, I'm going to do better than that. I'm going to get rid of all of them, all of his people. He hates Jews. The notion of getting rid of all the Jews is not, it goes way back, but it has continued to this day. There are people who want to get rid of all the Jews. So we're told all this information. If you don't recognize who Agag is, you might not pick up on it. But this is really, I mean, we are told specifically what's going on.
The other thing that hit me with this idea, Mordecai told Esther, don't tell the king or any of the king officials what your background is. And she followed it. Here we found out that it's not that Mordecai is a good Jew, and he tells people he's a good Jew, and that's why he's not going to go bow down to Haman. But he protected his daughter, or his adopted daughter.
There are two ways of looking at it, and we should probably look at both. The first is that he was wise enough to know that Jews are not always looked at favorably, and he protects his adopted daughter. Don't tell anybody. You also should probably consider the possibility that God laid this on his heart to say, you need to go careful here. We tend to leave that out of our thought process. Oh, look how wise he was. Don't rule out the fact that this very much could have been inspiration from God, because it turns out to be a really important point that she didn't reveal who she was.
I'm on,
It can be any other source of inspiration for Mordecai. It's got to be Yahweh.
Yeah, you can put it in a purely secular term and say, well, Jews are unpopular, so he wanted her to hide it. But I tend to gravitate to what you say, that is absolutely guidance from Yahweh, from God. Just step lightly here. She's going into the king's palace, and Mordecai just feels like telling her, don't tell anybody you're a Jew.
And another thing in my head is, here's a good Jew, and he's manipulating the system. Esther, don't tell anybody, we'll play nice. He loves you, maybe not, maybe yes, we don't know what the love means in that sentence. But he's not showing all his cards, and Esther's not showing all her cards about being a Jew. I want to pay the price, but not yet.
I agree. I mean, I think that's, they're not ashamed of who they are. Clearly, Mordecai is not ashamed of who he is, but he thinks it's wise not to tell.
Chapter 3, verse 7, and here's another thing about the time. It says, in the 12th year of Xerxes. So remember, Esther became queen at the 4th year of Xerxes. So just so you realize, 5 years has passed. Esther has been queen for 5 years, just as we start this. In the 12th year of King Xerxes, in the first month, the month of Nisan, the pur, that is the lot, was cast before Haman to determine a day and a month. And the lot fell on the 12th month, the month of Adar.
This seems confusing. So first of all, the poor, they have that celebration called Purim. These are lots, whether they're dice or, roll the bones. But people would go looking for augury. They would go to some, seer who would tell them, is it a good time? Kings, before they went into war, would have somebody throw the bones and, oh, the omens look good for this battle. Oh, the omens don't look good for this battle. Haman has decided he's killing all the Jews. I mean, in his mind, when he says, this is what I'm going to do, we're supposed to get it. That's his plan. So in January, he goes to somebody and he says, roll the bones for me, throw the lots, and give me a date and time to kill all the Jews. As simple as that. He goes for an augury for what he plans to do, which is to kill all the Jews. And they roll lots for it. It's in January, and it comes up that the time he gets told is December. So there's almost a whole year for him to prepare.
Okay, verse 8. Then, excuse me, then Haman informed King Xerxes, there's a certain people scattered and dispersed among the peoples of every province of your kingdom. Their laws are different from everyone else's, and they do not obey the king's laws. So it is not in the king's best interest to tolerate them. If it pleases the king, let a decree be issued to destroy them, and I will deposit 10,000 talents of silver into the royal treasury to pay those who carry it out. So the king removed the signet ring from his finger and gave it to Haman, son of Habaddith, at the Agagite, the enemy of the Jews. Keep your money, said the king to Haman. These people are given to you to do with them as you please.
You notice that it mentions Agagite and it calls him the enemy of the Jews. See, I'm not making stuff up. It actually tells us later on. I just hate to skip around, but it says the enemy of the Jews. And so he goes in, he's the new #1 chief advisor, and he goes, hey, Xerxes, there's some people in your kingdom. They're just scattered everywhere. And they play by their own rules. They don't follow your laws. They follow their own laws. It's not healthy for you to have people who don't follow your laws in your kingdom. Now, you see, again, the manipulation. Has this been a theme for several weeks in a row? He's making it sound like I'm only looking out for you. Do you remember what the Jewish leaders did with Jesus when they went to Pilate? They were doing it for him. He's a threat to Rome. This is about you. This is not about us. This is about you. This is what Haman does. It's exactly the same technique. These people are disobedient to you and they're scattered everywhere. It says, if you don't mind, if it's all right with you, why don't you just issue a decree that they're all going to get killed? They're just going to, and he says, if it's pleasing to you. And did he the money in?
Yes, he does the money.
Yeah, what he says is,
Deposit 10,000 talents of silver.
he says, you issue the decree, okay, that says we're going to kill them all, and I'll deposit the money to pay for the army that it's going to take to go do it. I'll pay for it. This is how much I like you, Xerxes. I need to get rid of these people for your benefit. This isn't good. And you know what? I'll even foot the bill for it. You just write the decree.
And this is, we don't know exactly, because there's different things about what the conversion is, but this is a whole lot of money. So first of all, Haman is rich, is one thing to know. And second of all, I mean, he's offering to put the money in the government coffers to pay for to kill them all.
He wants an excuse to kill all the Jews. And if Xerxes writes the decree, he's good. And he says, I'll deposit all this money and pay for the campaign. And Xerxes says, keep your money. Come on, Haman, it's us. Keep your money. I don't need your money. I got all the money. He says, here's my signet ring. What that means is the signet rings were used to seal documents, right? So what he's told Haman is, you go write your own decree, stamp my name on it, and whatever you think, they belong to you. I mean, it's up to you. So, this is Xerxes. This is how he does business. And the guy knows how to manipulate him.
Verse 12. On the 13th day of the first month, the royal scribes were summoned, and the order was written exactly as Haman commanded. The royal satraps, the governors of each province, and the officials of each people, in the script of each province, and in the language of every people. It was written in the name of King Xerxes and sealed with the royal signet ring. And the letters were sent by courier to each of the royal provinces with the order to destroy, kill, and annihilate all the Jews, young and old, women and children, and to plunder their possessions on a single day, the 13th day of Adar, the 12th month. A copy of the text of the edict was to be issued in every province and published to all the people so that they would be ready on that day. The couriers left, spurred on by the king's command, and the edict was issued in the citadel of Susa. Then the king and Haman sat down to drink, but the city of Susa was in confusion.
Not hard to understand this. Haman gets to draft the decree, and he just says, we're gonna kill them all, and it's gonna be on this day that he'd already previously gotten approval for, right? And the decree is written up in every language in the entire kingdom.
And remember, there's 121 provinces, and he's basically the king of the world at this point.
Yeah. And so you see how intent Haman is to get rid of all the Jews. I mean, he is leaving no loose ends. We're going to send this thing out, and so everybody has time to prepare, I guess, to lock them up ahead of time. They're going to plunder all their possessions. This is going to upend a lot of things.
I did ask Scott. So if you got a decree in, let's say, one of these provinces, and it said in 11 months they're going to come and kill every Jew and plunder. If you were a Jew, wouldn't you leave? That's the thing I thought, and you answered.
First of all, a lot of people can't afford to. A lot of people can't afford food for the road. They get paid and they eat what they make. That's how they live. And then also you get people who hang on to hope, who think
this certainly can't happen.
This isn't going to happen. Not in this country. Come on, this is Medo-Persia. This can't happen here. Somebody will intervene. These things happen. I remember before someone said this, and it sort of blew over.
And it takes you back to the Holocaust, and you think to yourself, when that was happening, it didn't happen overnight. And some of the Jews hid someplace, but I also thought, and some of the rich Jews were able to leave, but some of them didn't. And it must have been the same thing. It must have been, we can't afford, certainly this is going to happen. Certainly the people in the community are going to defend us against this. But my first thought was, seriously? I would leave, but it's not that easy.
But telling you that, we want you to understand how real this is. That we've seen this same sort of thing played out on the world stage. This is not mythology. This is absolutely even logical based on what we see in the world around us. And so this decree goes out. The last piece that gets overlooked a lot is it says that Xerxes and Haman went and ate and drank.
Sat down to drink.
Sat down to, didn't say eat and drink?
No, it just says drink.
Sat down to drink?
Just sat down to drink, but the city of Susa was in confusion. Is that a crazy last sentence?
What's that? Well, this decree, it sounds so simple. We're going to kill all the Jews in the kingdom, right? But in reality, these are human beings that get issued these orders. They know these people. They know, what's going to have to be done. And it has sent everybody into a tizzy, if you will. But Haman and Esther.
Well, it's also sent them into a tizzy because people have contracts with people.
Sure.
People owe people. They
Yeah.
have formed these relationships or bonds or some kind of, corporate thing or whatever. But, so it would, if your partner in business is a Jew and you just got this decree, it would throw everything into chaos.
At the risk of somebody being offended, there are a lot of Jewish merchants.
I know.
There just are. I mean, they, historically, they've been really good in business.
Yeah.
And so you're right. It is gonna, it's gonna cause a horrific mess all over the kingdom. The people are all worked up about it, but Haman and Xerxes head up to the penthouse to drink, totally unaware of the chaos going on around them. This is why I keep telling you, pay attention to who Xerxes is. Xerxes just, to him, the idea of doing this, no big deal. We got a lot more people, right? This is.
And how disconnect, could you make another pot of coffee? It's 7 already. This is the idea that they were so disconnected from anything. They're sitting in their palace and they do the decree and then they sit down and drink. Anyhow. Chapter 4, verse 1. When Mordecai learned of all that had happened, he tore his clothes, put on sackcloth and ashes, and went out to the middle of the city, wailing loudly and bitterly. But he went only as far as the king's gate, because the law prohibited anyone wearing sackcloth from entering that gate.
Can I talk from over here?
Yes, you can talk from over there.
So Mordecai, obviously, when he learns that all the Jews are going to be killed, takes it somewhat personally. And he's really upset, and he puts on sackcloth, and they'll put ashes on their head, and that's mourning. And in the Middle East, they mourn. Told you that before. Carol, did you see any of it while you were there?
No,
They mourn, they wail, they go. So Mordecai puts on sackcloth, which is kind of like burlap, and you could say that it's sort of a way of wallowing in the pain, but it's a sign that they show to everybody how this is affecting them. And he goes out in the streets dressed like this. He goes to his job watching the gate, I presume, but no further than the gate.
because the law prohibited anyone wearing sackcloth from entering that gate.
Here's another clue about Xerxes. Xerxes has said, I don't want anybody mourning in my presence. I don't want to listen to that stuff. Life is good. And if you want to act like, don't bring it in my house, right? And he has the ability to do it. So he's issued a decree that anybody wearing sackcloth and ashes and mourning is not to come into the palace. And
Sackcloth goes back books of it.
it does. Sackcloth is, it has been their when they're either in mourning or very repentant, they're mourning their sin, they dress themselves in sackcloth.
And I was supposed to read the next verse also. In every province in which the king's command and edict came, there was great mourning among the Jews. They fasted, wept, and lamented, and many lay in sackcloth and ashes. So it was not just Mordecai, it was the Jews throughout the kingdoms.
This is a tradition. This is the thing they do to show that they're in deep, deep mourning. And it's obviously it's all over the kingdom. You notice though that it says they fasted. We're going to hear that again. And we said at the beginning that in this book of Esther, God is never mentioned. And a lot of people think that's very odd, like maybe it doesn't even belong. But they fasted. Fasting is part of prayer, and the fasting is supposed to focus your attention, focus your will to only this thing that you're praying intently about. So even though Yahweh isn't directly mentioned, this is why you fast, because you're praying. So he's there.
Do we have any history or information of where was the Jewish church? Where were the rabbis? Where were these religions?
Okay, remember, these are the people who were carried into Babylon. Babylon gets conquered. These are the replacements. But there were a bunch of them who went back. King Cyrus funded the rebuilding of Jerusalem. So there are rabbis in Jerusalem. These are people who stayed in Babylon. So it's two separate groups, it's two separate populations.
But it would have covered Jerusalem. That would be one of the provinces.
Yeah, but these are people in Susa.
Yeah.
These are people that are part of the kingdom. Jerusalem is more or less left alone during this time. Under the Greeks, under the generals of Alexander, Jerusalem starts getting a lot more attention. But there are rabbis in Jerusalem as this goes on. Would it have gotten all of them? I never thought about it before, but certainly I don't see any way around it. Yeah. Good question. Good point. I never thought about it.
We're on verse 4 in chapter 4. When Esther's maidens and eunuchs came and told her about Mordecai, the queen was overcome with distress. She sent clothes for Mordecai to wear instead of a sackcloth, but he would not accept them. Then Esther summoned Hadhash, one of the king's eunuchs appointed to her, and she dispatched him to Mordecai to learn what was troubling him and why. So Hadhash went out to Mordecai in the city square in front of the Long's Gate, and Mordecai told him all that had happened to him, including the exact amount of money that Haman had promised to pay into the royal treasury in order to destroy the Jews. Mordecai also gave Hadhash a copy of the written decree issued in Susa for the destruction of the Jews, to show and explain to Esther, urging her to approach the king, implore his favor, and plead before him to her people.
Let's stop.
So just a second. So Hadhash went back and relayed Mordecai's response to Esther.
So first of all, here's Mordecai out in the streets in his sackcloth. And we know Xerxes doesn't like that, right? Xerxes doesn't want any of this mourning stuff in his presence. So even though Mordecai's out, he's causing a scene. And Esther hears about it. She looks down from like Rapunzel from the window and sees Mordecai. She doesn't know what's wrong with him, which tells you she's out of touch.
She didn't know anything about any of it.
And she sends him clothes as if the problem is he doesn't have clothes of his own. But what that is she sends him down some regular clothes and she says, Dad, look, stop this. Put on some respectable clothes. Stop causing a scene. And she sends one of her eunuchs, one of her attendants. Mordecai gets to tell him the whole story. She's not aware of this edict. Nobody suspects she's a Jew. There's no reason to tell her about it. So he sends the message back. And I want you to watch in this next little bit, this exchange of this guy running back and forth. So Esther tells the servant this. Mordecai tells the servant this. He goes back and tells Esther, and she gives him another message. And it's almost comical the way it goes. And it's supposed to be.
Verse 10, when Esther spoke to Hadhash and instructed him to tell Mordecai, all the royal officials and the people of the king's provinces know that one law applies to every man or woman who approaches the king in the inner court without being summoned, that he be put to death. Only if the king extends the golden scepter can the person live. But I have not been summoned to appear before the king for the past 30 days.
So a king this powerful, you can imagine a lot of people are going to be bothering him all the time. Hey, I want you to deal with this. I want you to deal with that. And Xerxes, being who he is, doesn't want to be bothered. So he has a rule that the only way you can talk to me is if I call for you. And if you show up unannounced and I haven't asked you here, I'll kill you. I mean, it's death. And what she says is, she reminds Mordecai of this rule. She says, there's one law for everybody that if you disturb the royal Xerxes unannounced, he kills you. So he'll kill me just as surely as he would kill anybody else. I can't do this. There is the one exception. If Xerxes is in a good mood, he says, hey, I haven't seen you in a while, and he extends his scepter to you, then you can approach. It's not going to happen very often. Most likely, and as she's saying, if I even attempt this, he'll kill me. And I haven't been summoned to see him in over 30 days.
This
So-
is the queen, remember?
Yeah, so it's probably not going to happen anytime soon that I get summoned.
So, because he's using his other concubines or virgins that he has lined up, so.
That's certainly the inference,
Sorry.
yes.
Okay, verse 12. When Esther's words were relayed to Mordecai, he sent back to her this reply. Do not imagine that because you are in the king's palace, you alone will escape the fate of all the Jews. For if you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance for the Jews will arise from another place, but you and your father's house will perish. And who knows if perhaps you have come to the kingdom for such a time as this.
Jean, you asked me in week 1 about the main point of this story, and there are probably several. But this right here is the crux of it. She had sent back a message that she says, look, if I try and talk to him about this, he'll kill me. And Mordecai sends her back a message because this is his daughter, remember? And he's getting her told, but he says, listen, honey, don't think that because you're in the palace and nobody knows you're a Jew that you're going to escape. They'll kill you just as surely as
They'll find
anybody
out
else.
you're a Jew.
And if you remain silent today, hang on those words. We get presented with opportunities to open our mouths, to say things, and we don't say them. If you choose not to open your mouth today, he says, deliverance will come from somewhere else. God has a plan. God's in control. This is your job, Mr. Phelps, and should you choose to accept it. But if you don't, he'll find someone else to use. You and your family will be in trouble. Then he throws in this last thing, and he says, and who knows if maybe you were brought to the kingdom for just such a time. In other words, you've been anointed, basically. Did you think it was just happy coincidence that you got to come audition, that you went into the program and immediately got all the best treatments and the special diet? Did you think it was just a stroke of luck that you were the one who was selected? Did you ever consider that maybe this was part of God's plan to get you inside there? You were brought into the kingdom for just such an occasion. And if there is a lesson there for us, is that there are times that there are things that should come out of our mouths. And it's like whack-a-mole. You don't want to be the one that sticks your head up to say it. That's what's going on. Does it have any modern day relevance? It does for me.
Well, and the whole idea that, I love that idea that God has a plan and God will make the plan happen. But we have freedom of choice. And if God wanted us to do something, it was our time to do something, we just decide not to do it, he'll make sure it gets done some other way. We might not be the one doing it. But I don't know. I love those two sentences.
Those of you who have been in some of these studies for a while have heard me say before that the surest sign that God's calling you to do something is when your first thought is, oh, dear Lord, not that. That's her reaction, not that. I can't do that.
I'm a real underliner in my Bible. That's why we have two separate Bibles, because Scott doesn't like to underline, but I definitely have verse 14 underlined. For if you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance for the Jews will arise from another place, but you and your father's house will perish. And who knows if perhaps you have come to the kingdom for such a time as this. Going on to verse 15.
Nobody really knows. But if you have faith, and I'm not sure Esther sat faith at this point. she likes to be clean and
Yeah.
pretty grow up. But she converts in the next paragraph. If I want to perish, let it happen.
Yeah, there's some things coming in this section. You're right. She does. She steps up, but you understand her initial reaction. She's just being practical. If you know that Xerxes has this policy that says if you show up without permission, without being called, I'll kill you. And there is one law for everyone on that matter. There are no exceptions, including the queen. You can understand her reaction. And maybe she's telling Mordecai, look, you're gonna have to find some other way to get this done. I can't do it.
Verse 15, then Esther sent this reply to Mordecai. Go and assemble all the Jews who can be found in Susa and fast for me. Do not eat or drink for 3 days, night or day. And I and my maidens will fast as you do. After that, I will go to the king, even though it is against the law. And if I perish, I perish. So Mordecai went and did all that Esther had instructed him.
So what I read in this is that Mordecai's response to her had an effect. Don't think you're going to be saved just because you live in the palace. And besides that, you know, if you don't open your mouth here, someone else will. God will lift someone else up, but it's going to cost. And it appears to have had an effect. She says, okay, fine. Mordecai, she sends this message, go gather up all the Jews you can find in Susa and fast for me. Here's the fasting again. And fasting is about prayer. What other possible use could there be in fasting? She sends him a message that says, I would like you to be hungry. No, the fasting, it's implicit that that's a prayer. And so go gather up every Jew you know, and I want you to fast and I want you to pray for me. And I and my women attendants will fast also and pray, of course. And then after the preparation, after we do this, after the prayer and fasting, I'm going to go to the king, even though it's illegal. And if I perish, I perish. That speaks to the faith. When you step out like that, you go, yeah, okay, you told me that I can't keep my mouth shut at this time, but you notice also that she's now giving instructions to Mordecai.
That sentence said, so Mordecai went and did all that Esther had instructed him. How many times do we see, and Esther did everything Mordecai instructed her to do, and now it's changed.
This is, you know, she's grown up. Esther has grown up, but Esther is now issuing directives, commands, whatever to Mordecai, and he follows it. You know, he's smart enough to understand it's not a matter of pride. There are people who during that time and in this time, I'm not going to take orders from a woman, duh. And you know, Mordecai is not one of those. He goes and does what she instructs, and when the time comes, she's going in whether it costs her or not.
Scott, when you read the footnote, they use the word destroy. The Arabian Bible says perish. What is the word in the original document?
I didn't.
One to me implies God's hand. The other one is just human. I kill you, I kill you.
Yeah, you know, I didn't dive on that particular word. I didn't think about it, but I think it's which verse are you talking about?
So it's 16. So it says it could say, or it could say, if I am destroyed, I will be destroyed, or it's I will be perished. So it's verse 16.
I think in that, if that's the one you're talking about, she's already spelled out that if you go to the king unsummoned, he's going to kill you. And so she's saying, I'm going to break the law.
And I'm going to be
and
killed.
I'm going to go to, and if he kills me, he kills me. But I'm going to do what I'm supposed to do.
Would you take a look at that? I'm thinking that the change of word means something.
You'll get an email this week. I'll figure it out. If there's anything to it, I'll tell everybody else, but at least I'll let you know.
Chapter 5, verse 1. Once again, it's telling you the time thing on the third day. So they've been fasting for 3 days. On the third day, Esther put on her royal attire and stood in the inner court of the palace across from the king's quarter. The king was sitting on his royal throne in the royal courtroom facing the entrance.
This is all we'll have time for
Yeah,
today. This will
right.
paint a picture.
Yeah,
So,
good.
so after the days of fasting and prayer, she puts on her royal attire, which means she's dressed, to the nines. That's going to be an attention getter, don't you think? I mean, she's dressed in a way nobody else can be because she's queen. So she gets all of her queen stuff on, and she goes and stands outside the door. She's in the lobby, right in the middle of the door, though, where she's going to be noticed. So this is a diplomatic way of handling this. If he looks up and says, "Oh, there's Esther. I haven't seen you in a month," right? Come on in, Esther. She doesn't just barge in on it. Just because you've decided that God has called you to do something,
To be
that you're
gutsy.
following his instructions to be gutsy, it doesn't mean that you get a pass to be obnoxious or foolish about it. She doesn't just barge in on the king, because it probably would have startled him and he would have had her killed. She's wise, and she gets out where she'll get attention. She gets out and it says that Xerxes is sitting in his throne, which faces the entrance. So they're painting a picture for you. She's like Queen Amidala in Star Wars, right? The big red robe thing, and she's right, and he can't miss her. And so she's put herself in that place. She can still get killed for that. Make no mistake. It's going to be obvious what she's doing. And the intent of the decree is, you don't come unless I call you. She's come with, so she's taken a big risk, but she's also done it wisely.
And I'm just going to read the one more verse. As soon as the king saw Queen Esther standing in the court, she found favor in his sight. The king extended the gold scepter to his hand towards Esther, and she approached and touched the tip of the scepter.
You see how crazy this is when somebody has that much power, right? I mean, yeah. And I mean, I kind of joke around when the guy, but it's really what's going on. He sees her. He hasn't seen her in over 30 days. She said so. And he looks up, and there she is in her
And she's
royal
beautiful.
robe. Oh, and she's beautiful. And it's like, oh man, what have I been thinking? I haven't seen you in over a month. And he has to take his scepter and point it to her because she can't approach. This is nuts. But it's the way things, I mean, that's the pomp and circumstance that you get into. And once he extends the scepter to her, it's safe for her then to approach the king. Yes, sir.
Well, I was thinking,
Mike?
she humbled herself first, but 3 days, doesn't 3 days remind you of something?
Well, it does. And I didn't make an issue because we can get, I mean, it has importance.
Right.
But you don't know if it starts, like our days begin at midnight.
Right.
So if it starts at 11 o'clock, that's one day. Midnight to midnight is the next day. And then 1 a.m., that could be 3 days. A lot of funny things happen with their reckoning in these things like fast.
Right.
I try not to make a big deal out of something and then get egg on my face. 3 days does seem rather significant. Deliverance comes at the end of the 3 days. I don't think that's an accident, John Paul. I certainly don't think it's an accident. But so far it's all working out perfectly. But you see now the long plan that's going on here. Anything else, anybody? I'll find out about your word. It's my word too now. God, we see your purpose. We see your plan. Sometimes not until after the fact. Sometimes we see chaos. And then we look up after the fact and realize that it may be the only way that circumstances could have been knit together for our benefit. It's a hard lesson for us. It's a lesson we have to keep learning. You know that. You understand. You see us overlook you. And the gift this week that I'd ask for is that you remind us and you help us see. You give us the peace that you promise during the chaos and the faith to believe and understand that we'll see the plan eventually. These ones that we've brought to you, these ones that we've prayed for, we lift them up because you tell us to. Don't forget them and don't let us forget them. It's important to us, and we know that you teach us through these things. We're thankful for it. Amen.
Thank you, guys. I hope everybody has a good week. And Cheryl, stay cool today. Lots of liquid while you're doing all that mowing.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. I might
Okay.
even jump into the pool to cool off. We'll see.
There you go. Okay, you guys have a good week. Thank you.
Bye, y'all. Thank you.
Bye.